Welcome to HFY Genesis. Today's story explores how humanity faced impossible odds and what happened when they ignored warnings to return to the moon. Let's dive in. The meeting room was sterile, like most rooms in the New Earth Command Center. Cold white lights hummed overhead, reflecting off the polished metal walls and sleek consoles. Everything had its place. Every movement had its purpose. There was no room for hesitation. No room for fear. Yet, as Lena Hawk stared at the screen, her hands clenched tightly around the cold edges of the table, a tremor of doubt snaked its way into her mind. The blueprints for the new lunar base flickered before her eyes, and for the first time in her career, Lena didn't feel the thrill of progress. She felt the weight of something ancient, something unsettling. The plan was simple. The Earth's climate was spiraling toward collapse. The oceans were rising, the air was thickening, and resources were running out faster than humanity could find replacements. The moon had always been a potential second home. Now it was humanity's last hope. A colony on the moon would give them access to untapped resources, water, minerals, space for expansion. The new base would act as both a mining hub and a launch site for further colonization missions beyond the moon. It was a dream everyone had bought into, a dream that Lena was tasked with overseeing. But dreams had a way of souring when you least expected it. "Captain Hawk," Dr. Kapoor's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're all set. The crew is on standby, the transport is prepped, everything's ready for launch in 3 days." Lena turned her head toward the chief scientist. Rajiv Kapoor had been with her on countless missions, brilliant, calm, and always focused. Today, however, his usual composure seemed a little strained. His dark eyes were unusually sharp, his brow furrowed as if he too felt the tug of something wrong. She had always trusted Rajiv's instincts. He never second-guessed his decisions. But now there was doubt in his gaze. She could see it. "Is something bothering you, Rajiv?" she asked quietly. Rajiv hesitated, then met her gaze. "It's the message," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "The one we intercepted last week. It's not like anything we've ever seen. It's a warning. We've run the codes over and over again, and—" "I know," Lena interrupted, her voice tight. "The message was clear. Never return to the moon. Leave it buried in history." She paused, breathing deeply. Those words had haunted her since the moment they'd received them. A strange transmission, originating from the far side of the moon, was intercepted by Earth's deep space monitoring station. The message had been cryptic, broken, barely comprehensible, but the meaning was undeniable. Never return to the moon. They'd all brushed it off, dismissed it as an anomaly, a glitch, a fragment of an old transmission, maybe even a hoax. But the message came through with eerie clarity, and despite what they all tried to convince themselves, there was something in it, something that made Lena's skin crawl. "We can't back down now, Rajiv," Lena said, her voice sharper than she intended. "We've already committed. The mission is too important." Rajiv's eyes narrowed. "I understand. But, Lena, this isn't just a warning from an unknown source. The moon, something on it, doesn't want us there." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the stories, of course, the rumors of strange phenomena, of abandoned lunar structures, of anomalies no one could explain. It was all just whispered tales, stories told to scare children, to keep people from venturing too far. Everyone knew that there was nothing on the moon to fear, right? But the voice in her head, the voice she couldn't silence, told her something else. There was something she was missing, something in those cryptic words. And deep down, she knew that if she let fear drive her now, she would lose everything. "Enough," Lena said, her voice firm. "I'm not letting a message from some ghostly transmission stop this mission. The Earth is dying, Rajiv. We're running out of time. We do this, or we lose everything." Rajiv stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly, I'll support you, Captain. But promise me one thing. Lena raised an eyebrow. What? Promise me that if things start to go wrong, you'll reconsider. You'll listen. Lena felt the weight of his words, but she nodded. I promise. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the unspoken fear that neither of them wanted to admit. It wasn't just the moon. It was the unknown. The unsettling feeling that something ancient and beyond their understanding was waiting, hidden in the dark. In the mission briefing room, the rest of the crew sat, tense and quiet. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows across their faces. Lieutenant Aaron Park, the mission's second-in-command, stood at the front, his posture rigid as he reviewed the landing protocols. The rest of the team, experts in various fields, listened intently, their faces drawn with the same unease that gripped Lena's heart. 3 days until launch, Aaron said, his voice calm but strained. We've trained for this. We'll make it work, but we need to be prepared for anything. I've read the reports about the strange signals coming from the far side of the moon. We'll avoid that region until we get settled. Lena watched her crew, each of them strong, capable, and determined. They were professionals, and she knew they'd follow her lead. But in their eyes, she saw the same question she couldn't answer. What if this mission isn't just about exploration? What if it's about something far worse? She swallowed hard, trying to push the thought away. There was no turning back. There couldn't be. She stood up, the weight of command settling on her shoulders. We're here to save humanity. We're not just explorers. We're the last line of defense. The base we set up on the moon will be our lifeline. We will make it work. A chorus of affirmations came from the crew, but they lacked conviction. They were following orders, just like Lena. No one knew what would happen once they set foot on that desolate alien world. The briefing ended and the crew dispersed to prepare for the final stages of the mission. Lena remained in the room, staring at the large map of the moon on the wall. Her fingers traced the path they would take toward the dark side of the moon, where the abandoned structures lay, where the warning had originated. She couldn't stop thinking about the message. It felt like a riddle, something that she couldn't quite piece together. Maybe it was just fear. Maybe it was just the weight of what they were about to do. But Lena had always been driven by one thing: the need to protect humanity. And now, that same need drove her to ignore the warning, to ignore the creeping doubt, and move forward. The fate of Earth rested on their shoulders, and there was no room for fear, not anymore. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales of humanity's defiance and survival in the face of the unknown. What would you do in Lena's position? Would you heed the warnings, or would you push forward regardless? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The eclipse cut through space like a blade, its engines humming in the stillness of the cosmos. Earth had already vanished behind them, a blue marble lost to the vastness of the universe. Lena Hawk sat in the command center, her eyes locked on the view ahead, hands resting on the cold metal of her chair. Her fingers tapped absently. She was trying to focus, but the nagging weight of the mission, of the warning, refused to leave her thoughts. This was supposed to be the easy part. The voyage to the moon should have been a routine operation. Instead, every minute felt like it stretched on forever. She had to push the doubt aside. They couldn't afford to let fear or uncertainty slow them down now. Captain, Lieutenant Aaron Park's voice came through the intercom, breaking her concentration. We're on schedule, 30 minutes to lunar orbit. Lena glanced over at the countdown clock. The timing was precise, too precise. But the moon's dark side loomed ahead, silent and watching. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the tension. The message, the voice they'd heard in the transmission, never returned to the moon. It was still fresh in her mind. She couldn't let that message control them. They were going to the moon, and they were going to succeed. Copy that, Lieutenant. Stand by for orbit insertion, Lena replied, her voice steady. But the truth was, she could feel the creeping dread in her chest. They were headed into unknown territory. The moon had been silent for so long. What had changed? What were they walking into? The crew was silent, each person absorbed in their tasks, but the tension in the air was thick. Even Maya Torres, the communications officer, seemed distracted. Her eyes flicked nervously between her console and the distant lunar surface, still unseen in the deep shadows of space. "Captain," Maya's voice broke through again. "We're picking up something. Faint, but it's there." A signal. Lena straightened. Not again. "Can you trace it?" Lena asked, not bothering to mask the sharp edge in her tone. "I'm trying," Maya replied, her fingers flying over the control panel. "It's coming from the far side of the moon, near the region we're targeting. It's not interference. It's structured." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The far side of the moon was where the transmission had originated. The same message, the one they'd all chosen to ignore, the one that had warned them away. The signal now, it was almost as if it was waiting for them. "We'll ignore it for now," Lena said quickly, trying to sound calm, even as her pulse quickened. "We've got a job to do. Keep monitoring, Maya. If it escalates, let me know." There was a brief pause before Maya spoke again. "Understood." Lena turned her attention back to the view ahead. The first glimpse of the moon appeared on the horizon, its surface pockmarked and desolate. The barren landscape seemed to stretch on forever. The sight should have been awe-inspiring, but instead, Lena felt an oppressive weight pressing down on her chest. It was as though the moon was waiting for them to arrive, as if it knew they were coming. As the eclipse entered lunar orbit, the crew began preparations for the descent. The lander, nestled in the docking bay, was primed and ready to detach. Lena walked to the forward observation window, her eyes scanning the lunar surface below. She had been on countless missions, but this one was different. The moon held a special place in humanity's history, both as a triumph and as a mystery. But the warnings, those cryptic transmissions, had unsettled her more than she was willing to admit. "Captain, we're ready for descent," Aaron said, his voice firm but lacking its usual confidence. Lena nodded and took her seat at the helm. The crew moved swiftly, their motions precise. The air was thick with focus, the hum of the ship's systems filling the room. Lena couldn't look away from the lunar surface growing ever closer. Her hands gripped the console, fingers digging into the cold metal. The lander detached, gliding smoothly toward the moon's surface. It wasn't long before the low gravity of the moon made the ship feel like it was floating, weightless. Every moment felt stretched, drawn out. Lena's eyes locked onto the terrain below, barren, endless, scarred by craters. They were descending near the edge of a vast expanse, toward the site of the proposed colony. The lander shook slightly as it cut through the lunar atmosphere. Outside, the surface was pocked with impact craters, the pale dust covering everything in sight. "Landing in 3, 2, 1. Maya's voice trailed off as the lander touched down, the impact soft but steady. The team remained silent, listening to the low hiss of the release system as the cabin pressure stabilized. Lena stood first. "All right, let's move. Gear up and head to the surface." The crew unstrapped themselves, moving quickly into their suits. The airlock opened with a faint hiss. Lena stepped out first, her boots crunching against the loose lunar dust. The surface was more alien than she had imagined. The dust was thick, fine like talcum powder, clinging to everything. The lander's thrusters hummed behind her, the only sound besides the steady breathing of her crew. Her visor reflected the barren, lifeless landscape stretching in every direction. There was no sign of life. Nothing that would suggest this place had ever been anything more than a dead rock floating in space. Yet something about it made her feel watched, like an unseen presence was lingering just out of sight. Aaron was the first to break the silence. "Base location's a few clicks ahead. he said. "Let's get moving." Lena nodded, but her gaze lingered on the distant horizon, where shadows seemed to stretch a little too long, twisting unnaturally. The crew moved toward the colony site, setting up equipment along the way. But the further they walked, the more Lena felt it. The moon wasn't just barren, it felt alive. The low, distant hum from the ship's engines was the only sound that broke the unnerving quiet. And then it came. A tremor, a soft shake, as though the ground itself was breathing. Lena froze. "Did you feel that?" Maya asked, her voice tense. "It's nothing," Lena said, though her stomach twisted. "Just a minor shift. Keep moving." But deep down, Lena knew. The moon had just warned them. Again. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales of humanity's defiance and survival against the unknown. What would you do if you knew the moon didn't want you there? Would you push forward, or would you listen to the warning? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Lena stared at the horizon, the gray dust of the moon stretching out in every direction. The colony base was just ahead, a cluster of sleek, metallic domes set against the harsh lunar landscape. They'd been moving toward it for hours, the air inside their helmets growing thicker, their movements slower with each step. The silence of the moon pressed on them, suffocating, as though the very surface was holding its breath, waiting for something. The tremor had been the first sign, a soft pulse that had shaken the ground beneath their feet. But no one said anything. They just kept walking. They couldn't afford to stop now. The base had to be set up. The resources had to be gathered. The mission had to succeed. As they approached the base, Lena's mind wandered. The warning, "Never return to the moon," had been dismissed as a glitch, an anomaly in the transmission. But now, as they stood on the surface, her doubts grew. What if the warning wasn't a mistake? What if something was waiting for them here? Something they weren't meant to disturb. "Captain?" Aaron's voice cut through her thoughts. "We're here. Let's set up." Lena nodded and motioned for the team to begin unloading the gear. The metallic domes of the base glinted in the weak sunlight, their surfaces reflecting the barren landscape around them. It looked like nothing more than a place of survival. No beauty, no inspiration, just the cold, functional design of humanity's last refuge. But even as they began unloading, the unease remained, like a shadow at the edge of her vision. The longer they stayed, the more she felt it, the presence. Something was watching them, waiting. She couldn't let fear control her, not now, not when so much was at stake. The first signs of something wrong came that evening. The team had finished setting up the perimeter, running diagnostic tests on the base's systems. Everything was functioning as expected, or so they thought. It started with the lights. At first they flickered, a soft flicker, barely noticeable. But as the night wore on, the flickering became more pronounced, more erratic. The hum of the base's generators seemed to waver, as if they were losing power. Lena stood in the main control room, staring at the flickering screens, her brow furrowed. She knew this was not a technical issue. This felt different. "Maya, what's going on with the power?" Lena asked, her voice steady but tight. Maya was at her console, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. "It's not the power, Captain. It's the signal. There's interference. We're picking up strange readings." "Strange how?" Lena asked, her heart skipping a beat. "It's not normal. The readings are coming from below the surface." Lena's pulse quickened. Below the surface. That was where the ancient structures were supposed to be. The structures that no one had dared to investigate for decades. The ones that might hold the answers to the warnings they had received. "Give me the coordinates," Lena said, her voice clipped. "We're going down." The team gathered in the airlock, preparing for the descent. The base's excavation equipment was already loaded and ready to go. Lena led the way, her boots crunching against the fine lunar dust as they made their way toward the entrance of the excavation site. The base's overhead lights illuminated the entrance, casting long, eerie shadows that stretched across the barren ground. Maya checked the instruments again. "The signal is getting stronger, Captain. It's coming from directly below us." The tunnel entrance was just ahead, an old mining shaft that had been abandoned long ago. It was wide enough for the team to enter in a single line. Lena took the first step inside, the cold, stale air filling her lungs. The walls of the tunnel were rough, uneven, as though hastily carved into the rock. Yet, something about it felt deliberate, too deliberate for something that was abandoned. As they descended deeper into the shaft, the air grew colder. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate, as if the entire structure was alive, pulsing with an energy that Lena couldn't explain. Then, it happened. A low rumble, barely audible at first, echoed through the tunnel. The walls shook. The ground trembled. Lena staggered, her hand slamming against the wall for balance. The team stopped, looking around in confusion. "What was that?" Rajiv asked, his voice trembling with an edge of fear. "I don't know," Lena said, her own voice tight. "But we're going deeper. Whatever it is, we need to find it." The deeper they went, the more oppressive the feeling became. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning as though it had no end. It wasn't a mine, it was something else. A structure, a building, an ancient forgotten complex, buried deep beneath the lunar surface. Finally, they reached a vast chamber, the walls stretching impossibly high. At the center of the room stood a massive obelisk, dark and angular, its surface covered in strange markings that seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. The air in the room felt thick, charged with energy. Maya stepped forward, scanning the obelisk with her equipment. This isn't just an ancient ruin. This is active. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Active. They had assumed the moon was just a lifeless rock, a place to mine and harvest resources. But now, standing in the presence of this structure, it was clear they had made a grave mistake. "Why didn't we know about this?" Aaron muttered, his voice low. Lena shook her head, her mind racing. "This wasn't just abandoned, it was hidden, and now we've found it." The obelisk seemed to thrum, vibrating with energy. The markings on its surface shifted, rearranging themselves, as if the structure was reacting to their presence. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air, as though the very core of the moon was speaking to them. The warning they had dismissed, "Never return to the moon," echoed in Lena's mind. The moon wasn't just a lifeless rock. It was something else entirely, something ancient. And now, they had awoken it. What would you do if you stumbled upon an ancient structure that was never meant to be found? Would you push forward, or would you turn back? Let us know in the comments. The chamber was cold. So cold that Lena could feel the chill seeping into her bones through the layers of her suit. The team stood in a loose circle around the obelisk, the strange markings on its surface glowing faintly, their patterns shifting as if they were alive. The air felt heavier here, pressing in on them, as if the very room was holding its breath. Maya's fingers hovered over her scanner, eyes locked on the readings. The instrument buzzed faintly, the data pouring in. But it wasn't just the numbers that made her tense. There was something else, something beyond the cold, sterile readings. It was an unmistakable hum, a resonance, as if the obelisk itself was pulsing with energy. "We need to get a closer look," Lena said, her voice tight, betraying a hint of the anxiety she'd been suppressing. "Rajiv, what are we dealing with here?" Rajiv moved forward cautiously, his expression unreadable as he inspected the markings. His breath was slow, deliberate, like he was trying to stave off the sense of unease that hung in the air. He ran his gloved fingers over the symbols. "I can't say for sure, but these are not like anything we've seen before. They seem to be changing." In real time, Lena took a slow breath. The obelisk's surface seemed to respond to their movements, the patterns rearranging themselves as if the structure was aware of their presence. There was no mistaking it now, This was no accidental discovery. This was something designed, something that had been waiting for them. The rest of the team gathered around, the low hum filling the room, vibrating in their bones. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew what had to come next. The moon had given them a warning, and they had ignored it. Lena stepped closer, her gaze locked on the shifting symbols. "What happens if we activate it?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Rajiv didn't look up from his examination. "I don't know, but something tells me it's not meant to be activated. The power source, it's immense. It's almost as if the structure is drawing from something deeper, something ancient." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. The first warning, the message, never return to the moon, had been clear. The moon didn't want them here. And yet, they had come. She turned to Aaron. He was standing near the entrance, his hand resting lightly on the doorframe as he studied the room with growing apprehension. "We've gone too far, Captain. We should go back. This isn't what we were meant to find." Lena knew he was right. They had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, but there was no turning back now. The mission had always been about survival. The moon was humanity's last hope. They needed whatever this structure had to offer, even if they didn't fully understand it. The hum in the air intensified, the vibrations rattling the floor beneath them. It was as if the very walls were alive, stirring in response to their presence. Lena took a deep breath, her mind whirling. They had to make a decision. They couldn't just stand here forever. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the growing unease. "We continue, but we proceed carefully. No more assumptions. We analyze everything." The rest of the crew nodded, though their faces betrayed their reluctance. They moved closer to the obelisk, tools in hand, ready to document and extract whatever data they could. The atmosphere in the room was charged, filled with a sense of impending danger. Maya, her hands steady, moved first, scanning the obelisk with her equipment. The readings were erratic, jumping from one extreme to another. But one thing was certain. Whatever was powering this structure, it was something far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. "I can't explain this," Maya muttered, her voice almost a whisper. "The energy signatures are off the charts. This is beyond anything we've ever studied." Lena's gaze shifted to the other members of the team. They were all focused, their faces tense with concentration. Everyone was aware of the enormity of what they were about to uncover. What they had uncovered. Rajiv, still studying the symbols, looked up suddenly. "Captain, the markings, they're reacting to our presence. They're not just symbolic, they're functional." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crew. The obelisk began to hum louder, its vibrations growing stronger. The walls of the chamber seemed to shift in response, and Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of function are we talking about?" Aaron asked, his voice strained. Rajiv didn't answer immediately. Instead, he focused on one of the symbols, his fingers tracing it slowly. As he did, the markings seemed to shift beneath his touch, glowing brighter, then fading. "There's something here," Rajiv said slowly. "This isn't a message. It's a command." Lena's blood ran cold. A command? Suddenly the ground shook again, more violently this time. The hum became a roar, and the obelisk flared to life. Light erupted from its surface, bright and blinding, engulfing the chamber in a pulse of energy. The air crackled, the vibrations intensifying until Lena thought the very walls would collapse under the pressure. "Get back!" Lena shouted, but it was too late. The energy from the obelisk surged outward, pushing everyone to the ground. The chamber was filled with blinding light, and for a moment, there was nothing but a deafening roar. Then, silence. Lena slowly rose to her feet, blinking as her vision cleared. The obelisk had stopped glowing, but the air still felt thick, heavy, as if something had changed. The ground was still vibrating beneath their feet, but now it felt different. less immediate but more ominous. She turned to her team, all of them slowly getting up, looking around in confusion. "What just happened?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. Lena didn't answer immediately. She was too focused on the obelisk, now dark and silent, its surface still covered in shifting symbols. But something had changed. She could feel it. The structure had responded to their presence, to their activation, and now it was waiting for them to make the next move. "We've uncovered something. Bigger than we expected," Lena said finally, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "We don't understand what it is yet, but we need to move forward. We need answers." Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more epic tales of humanity's survival and defiance in the face of the unknown. The eerie hum of the obelisk still reverberated in Lena's bones, even though the structure was silent. The chamber was suffused with a strange stillness, the kind of silence that felt unnatural. The energy that had once surged through the air had now dissipated, leaving behind a heavy sense of waiting, of something unfinished. Lena stood motionless, trying to gather her thoughts. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. They had activated the obelisk. They had triggered something ancient, and it had responded, almost as though it had been waiting for them. The glow had been blinding, the hum deafening, but now it was gone, and all that remained was the unsettling calm. She took a step forward, her boots making a soft crunch on the dust-laden floor, and her eyes never left the obelisk. It was as though she was drawn to it, to the pulsing darkness that seemed to beckon her closer. "Maya, check the systems," Lena said, her voice sharp. "Make sure everything's stable." Maya, still visibly shaken, nodded quickly. She turned back to her console, tapping in a few commands. The flickering screens reflected off her visor, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Something's wrong," Maya said, her voice tight. "The signal, it's stronger, and there's something else. The base's systems are, how do I explain this? They're reacting to the obelisk. It's like they're competing for control." Lena's stomach dropped. It made sense, in a horrifying way. They had been warned. Never return to the moon. The message had been clear, but they had ignored it. Now, the moon seemed to be taking action. Whatever this obelisk was, it wasn't just a relic. It was a power that was now intertwined with their mission. "Rajiv," Lena called, her eyes flicking toward the scientist. "What's your take? Is this what you expected?" Rajiv was still at the base of the obelisk, kneeling down as if he were studying it, almost in a trance. He didn't respond immediately, as if his mind was still processing everything he had seen. Finally, he looked up, his face pale beneath the helmet. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "I never expected this. It's not just a structure, it's something alive. I don't think we were meant to uncover this. Whoever, or whatever built this, didn't want us here." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. There it was again, the feeling that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "We need to leave." Aaron's voice cut through the tension. He was standing near the exit, his hand gripping the doorframe, his eyes scanning the room nervously. "This is a mistake. We're pushing too far. The system's malfunctioning. The energy readings, nothing about this feels right." Lena turned to face him, her heart pounding. She had heard his words, felt them stir something inside of her, but the need for answers, for progress, was stronger. She couldn't let fear decide for her. She couldn't let them retreat now, not when they were so close, not when humanity's future was at stake. "Aaron," she said, her voice steady but unyielding, "we can't stop now. We've come this far. The base needs to function, and this is the key. We have no other choice." Aaron's jaw tightened. "We don't even know what we've uncovered. We're playing with forces we don't understand." Lena stepped forward, her decision made. "I understand what's happening. The systems are reacting to the obelisk, yes, but that means it's working. We have to use this. Whatever it is, it's the only chance we have left. She could see the doubt in Aaron's eyes, the fear that had been growing ever since they entered the chamber. He didn't trust this place. He didn't trust what they'd activated. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" he asked, his voice low. "Are you really sure we're ready to risk everything on this?" For a moment, Lena hesitated. Deep inside, a small voice whispered that they should leave, that they should listen to the warning. But the larger part of her, the part that had led this mission, that had fought for it, refused to listen to that voice. They couldn't afford to turn back now. "Yes," she said firmly. "We press forward." The decision was made. The team moved into action, setting up equipment to access the obelisk's energy source, attempting to establish communication with whatever systems were inside. The entire operation felt like a high-wire act, the balance precarious, the stakes too high to contemplate. Lena kept her focus. Her heart was pounding, but she shut it out. She had to. They had no time for doubt now. As the hours passed, the tension in the room grew unbearable. The hum from the obelisk had never quite faded. It was there, like a background noise, a constant reminder of the power that lay just beneath their fingertips. Suddenly, a loud crack sounded through the room. The ground shook again, this time more violently, as if the moon itself was protesting their intrusion. Lena staggered, grabbing hold of a nearby pillar for balance. The walls of the chamber buckled and groaned, as though something deep below them was shifting, awakening. "We're not alone," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. She was staring at the readouts, which had gone wild. Lena's heart sank as the realization hit her. The obelisk wasn't just a monument, it was a door that had been sealed shut for centuries. And now something had been unleashed, something that had been waiting. A low rumble filled the air. The walls seemed to contract, pressing in on them. Then the lights flickered, and the floor trembled beneath their feet. "We need to leave!" Aaron shouted, his voice rising in panic. "Now!" But Lena didn't move. She couldn't. The door to the unknown had opened, and she was standing at the threshold. No, they weren't leaving. Not now. "What have we done?" Rajiv's voice broke the silence, tinged with awe and terror. The lights went out. "What would you do if you triggered an ancient force beyond your understanding? Would you press forward, or would you run? Let us know in the comments below." The chamber trembled. The walls seemed to breathe, swelling in and out, as if the very core of the moon had come alive. Lena's heart hammered in her chest as she steadied herself against the shifting floor. The lights flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows across the ancient obelisk. A deep, bone-shaking hum filled the air, growing louder, vibrating through her bones. "We need to move. Now!" Aaron's voice cracked, filled with a raw panic that sent a chill down Lena's spine. He was already halfway to the exit, eyes wide with terror, hands shaking. Lena's mind raced. The obelisk, it was activating. Everything they had uncovered, everything they had ignored, was now coming to fruition. The moon wasn't just a tomb. It was a trap. And they had fallen right into it. But they couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without understanding what they had unleashed. Her eyes locked onto Rajiv, his face pale and drawn as he stood motionless before the obelisk. He wasn't just studying it. He was worshipping it, his gaze fixated, as if the answers to everything lay in those shifting symbols. "Rajiv!" Lena shouted, but her voice was drowned by the deafening rumble. He didn't respond. His eyes were wide, and his mouth opened in silent awe. Or was it fear? She couldn't tell. Another violent tremor rocked the chamber, knocking them all off balance. This time, the walls groaned in protest, as though something ancient, buried deep within the moon's core, was fighting to escape. "We don't have time!" Maya yelled, her voice desperate as she clutched the console in the corner. The readings were spiking, Power surges, erratic signals, it was all escalating rapidly, uncontrollably. Lena's breath caught. She had to make a choice, escape or understand. But before she could move, the obelisk began to pulse. The symbols, now blazing with an eerie blue light, shifted rapidly, faster than she could process. It was as if they were speaking to her, demanding something, demanding action. A voice, low and resonant, broke through the chaos, reverberating in the chamber and in her very skull. "You were warned." Lena's skin prickled. The voice was everywhere, all around her. The very air felt charged, electric, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate with power. She couldn't move. "What is it?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "What is it saying?" Lena took a step forward, eyes still locked on the obelisk. The force, the weight of it, was undeniable. It was calling to them. But what was it? What had they unearthed? "You were warned," the voice echoed again. This time, it wasn't just a warning, it was a command. "Leave." Lena's mind reeled. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out, to escape this nightmare. But another part of her, the part that had brought them here, refused to back down. They had come this far. They needed to know what this was. She turned to face her crew. "We're not leaving. We need to find out what's happening." Her voice rang with determination. But inside, her doubts gnawed at her like a parasite. But Aaron was already at the door, ready to break out of the chamber. "No, Lena. You can't stay here. It's alive. It's waking up. This isn't just a structure. It's a prison. We're disturbing it." His voice was frantic now, panicked. But Lena's gaze remained fixed on the obelisk. Her crew was divided. Rajiv still hadn't moved, his hands trembling as he reached for the console. Maya was looking at Lena, torn between her loyalty to the mission and the terror that was consuming them all. They had to understand. They had no choice. "We can't run," Lena said, the words leaving her lips with a finality that surprised even her. "We must understand what we've triggered. This could be our only chance to learn what the moon is hiding." A violent crack split the air, louder than any tremor before it. The walls shook, and the ground beneath their feet split open. A blinding light burst from the obelisk, washing over them in waves of overwhelming energy. The chamber darkened as the obelisk's glow turned a deep crimson, the hum now a deafening roar. In that moment, everything shifted. The walls seemed to collapse inward, pulling in on itself, and Lena was thrown to the ground, her vision spinning. She couldn't hear anything over the sound of the rumbling, the static, the cracking of the ancient structure. Was this it? Was this the end? Then, through the chaos, came the voice again. This time louder, more forceful. "You are not welcome here. You should have listened." And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The light flickered, and the rumbling ceased. The chamber was silent, save for the heavy breathing of her team. Lena slowly pushed herself to her feet. Her limbs were shaky, but she steadied herself, looking around. The walls, which had once felt alive, now stood still, cold and ominous. The obelisk was silent. It had stopped glowing, but the damage had been done. Lena knew that now. The realization struck her like a blow to the chest. They had awakened something powerful, something ancient, and it was angry. What the hell just happened? Aaron's voice broke through her thoughts, his words frantic. "I don't know," Lena replied, her voice hollow. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. The warning wasn't just a message. It was a force. They had come to the moon for survival, for humanity's future. But in doing so, they had unleashed something far more dangerous. And now, the moon itself seemed intent on making them pay for their trespass. Enjoying this chapter? Don't forget to like and subscribe to HFY Genesis for more spine-chilling tales of humanity's defiance and survival against the unknown. What would you do if you triggered something ancient and uncontrollable? Would you push forward, or would you listen to the warning? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The silence aboard the Eclipse was suffocating, heavier than any of the previous moments of tension they had endured. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound breaking the stillness, and even that felt distant, like it belonged to another world. The view outside the observation window showed Earth, a pale blue dot in the vastness of space. It was both a distant memory and an unreachable future. Lena sat alone in the command center, staring at the planet below. The weight of everything they had done pressed down on her chest, and for the first time since the mission had started, she wasn't sure what came next. Their survival felt hollow. What was left to be proud of when everything had gone so horribly wrong? The crew had retreated into their own spaces. Aaron had locked himself in his quarters, unwilling to speak after the chaos they'd witnessed. Maya, who had been the most vocal supporter of the mission, had fallen silent. Rajiv, once eager to explore the unknown, was now withdrawn, pacing restlessly through the ship, his face etched with guilt. The once unified team was now fractured, haunted by the consequences of their defiance. Lena knew she had failed them. She had made the decision to press forward despite the warnings, and now they were carrying the weight of an unknown and possibly irreversible consequence. The moon, its obelisk, its ancient force, had awakened, and what it had released was beyond their comprehension. Her hand hovered over the console, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it. To do what? Send another transmission? Report to Earth? How could she when they were running from something they didn't understand? What would they say when they got back? Would they even be able to return? Would humanity ever allow them to come back to the moon? The questions gnawed at her. The silence in the command center was a reminder of how much they had lost. "Captain," Maya's voice crackled over the comms, pulling Lena from her thoughts. I don't know how to say this, but we need to talk." Lena leaned forward, fingers pressed against the cool surface of the console. It wasn't an order, it was a plea. Maya's voice, usually strong and filled with purpose, was now filled with the cracks of emotion they had all tried to ignore. "I'm coming to you," Lena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. When Lena stepped into the small meeting room, Maya was sitting by the viewport, staring out at the same view of Earth. There was something different about her posture, slumped, defeated. When Maya turned to face Lena, her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept, as if the weight of everything was breaking her down. "We've failed, haven't we?" Maya asked quietly. There was no anger in her voice, only the soft resignation of someone who had come to terms with an inevitable truth. Lena hesitated. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to admit it. But the words came out before she could stop them. "Yes, we've failed, and it's not just about the mission." Maya nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "We pushed too far, Captain. We thought we could control it, that we could use the moon, but it's like the moon was waiting for us, like it was always meant to keep us out. We never had a chance, did we?" Lena sat across from her. For the first time in a long while, she felt the sting of her own tears. It wasn't just about the moon anymore. It was about what they had lost, each other, their purpose, their future. And now they were on a path they didn't understand, moving forward into the unknown without the tools to face it. "We should have turned back," Lena said softly, "when we first received the warning. We were blinded by our need to survive, to make something out of nothing. But the truth is, we were always running out of time, running from the inevitable." Maya wiped her eyes, sniffling. "What do we do now, Captain?" Lena didn't know how to answer. They had no way of knowing what the moon's force would do next. There was no escape from the consequences they had triggered. But Lena couldn't let them sink into despair. If she gave up, so would the crew. If she stopped fighting, so would they. "We survive," Lena said with newfound resolve. "We don't have a choice. We carry the burden of this mistake, but we carry it together." The following days were filled with a quiet, grim determination. The crew moved like ghosts, empty, yet functional. Lena made it clear that they had to keep going, that survival, however hollow, was still their mission. They made the necessary repairs to the ship, working through the night, their eyes hollow, but their hands steady. But the question lingered, unspoken. What have we really achieved? The eclipse drifted further from the moon, and as it did, Lena watched as the distant satellite receded from view. Her heart ached, not with grief, but with a sense of finality. The moon had taken what it wanted. It had made its warning clear, and the cost of defying it had been immense. The crew had been changed, shattered in ways they couldn't yet understand. But Lena knew one thing. They couldn't let it end here. They had made a terrible mistake. Yes, but they were still alive. And that, at least, was something. A week later, the crew gathered in the common area, the unease still lingering, but with a quiet strength growing in their hearts. They were not the same people they had been when they landed on the moon. They were something new. Whether they were broken or forged into something stronger didn't matter. They had survived. Lena stood at the front of the room, her voice steady. "We've been given a second chance," she said, looking around at the faces of her crew. "And we're going to make sure it wasn't in vain. We'll learn from this. We will survive, and we will never forget what the moon has taught us." And though none of them knew what the future held, there was a quiet resolve in each of them. They had been to the moon. They had uncovered its secrets, and they had paid the price for it. But they were still alive, and that, for now, would have to be enough. What would you do if you learned that survival came at the price of disturbing something ancient and uncontrollable? Would you keep going, or would you stop? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more HFY adventures.